Hey there, welcome to Recovery Sucks, but It's So Worth It. I am Robin Baker, I'm your host, and welcome to your reality check on eating disorder recovery. Here we talk to real people that have gone through eating disorder recovery challenges, have great tips, great advice, and this show is all about a huge dose of reality, but also a heaping dose of love, support, and connection. Thank you so much for joining me today. And just a quick reminder, this podcast is by no way a replacement for proper medical attention for your eating disorder recovery. If you need help, if you need additional help, please seek out a licensed professional. On today's show, we talk to Tracy Brown, who is recovered from her eating disorder and is also a licensed dietitian that works with others going through the recovery process. So if you've ever wondered what it's like to work in the eating disorder recovery world while being someone that's recovered as well, this is a great podcast for you to listen for some amazing advice from Tracy Brown. So today on Recovery Sucks, but It's So Worth It, I love to welcome Tracy Brown. She is a somatic nutrition therapist, attuned eating coach, and embodiment teacher. She helps people come home to themselves through their bodies by healing their relationship with food and weight, as well as feel safer and less overwhelmed in their bodies. For 11 years, she has guided people in healing from disordered eating, body image concerns, and chronic dieting using attuned eating, health at every size approach. And I love the health at every size approach. And I'm so excited to introduce Tracy Brown to the show. Thank you so much for joining us today, Tracy.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be able to talk about all things recovery and the parts that suck, the parts that is worth every second. And especially if you're someone who has a heart for helping in whatever capacity it ends up being, really, at least in my humble opinion, some of the ingredients that you're going to really need to feel like you're a really clear guide for that.
Right. So, Tracy, you have suffered from an eating disorder, and you are now a dietitian that works in the recovery world and helps other people that are going through the same exact things that you went through. And I know a lot of people, I have friends that I met in treatment that now are therapists, and, it's a really, really tricky thing to get involved with. And so I really wanted to talk about this today because I don't think a lot of people discuss this. So did you become a dietitian before or after you were in recovery?
So after recovery, but can I talk about that journey a little bit?
Yeah,
do you mind?
Absolutely.
Okay. Because I think it will bring some context to it. So I started recovery 17 going on 18, and my first experiences with treatment were inpatient treatment, not so great, but it was what I needed. But really, the little seed got planted that felt good about, I didn't know what the future would be like. So, and I hadn't gone to college yet, but I worked with someone similar to me, had the same language and labels that I use now, but it was basically non-diet. And I had zero experience with that with any other practitioners. And it felt really at home. And I think the only reason I went towards dietetics more so than being a therapist is just because of that relationship and that experience of I felt like I ultimately was the one that had the wisdom. And I had to just learn how to get through the layers of tuning back into that. And so, so that kind of got planted back in the back of my mind, but I still had lots of work to do. So, I graduated high school. I'm in recovery, therapy, and nutrition therapy, whatever. And then, kind of have this idea that I was going to do that in college, but, recovery it's a rough ride. It's, ups and downs, and sometimes being on board and sometimes not. And it took me, a long time, it was 5 years to get through undergrad, just because there were sometimes I was really in it and I couldn't handle the class load, or I got involved in a not so good relationship because of some vulnerabilities I had. And that made things go longer too. But by the time I gotten towards the end of my undergrad, and I was going to be a dietitian because of that original relationship I had with that non-diet dietitian who taught me, if you need to eat the same food 3 times a day to eat enough, we'll do that, So I had just lots of this permission to make it go what was good and safe and make it work for me. So eventually I was so willing to listen and trust a little bit because I wasn't having all my power taken away.
Right.
And so anyway, it's funny. I had gotten to really a place where it was less in like the restricting kind of area. And I started to see like all the things I was learning in undergrad in dietetics were things that not in a million years you would tell somebody who was struggling with their way to the food.
Right.
And so I recognized like, oh my gosh, I am like eating Oreos for breakfast or Chinese for breakfast and doing all these like non-diet intuitive eating learning things on the sly. And as I'm in my undergrad in dietetics, I'm like doing these like fake meal plans to turn in as my homework because like I couldn't show these things or I might get judged. So I was like, okay, there's a total disconnect here.
So I got a question for you right there.
Yeah.
Like, so when they were talking about all of these, traditional quote unquote dieting approaches or how to eat a quote unquote healthy diet, right? How many years in recovery were you when you were dealing with that type of thing?
By the time I had gotten to that place, I was probably 3 to 4, a good 3 to 4 years in. Again, I took a longer route just because I needed more space for myself.
Right,
but
you did what was good for you.
Yeah, I did. Even though at the time it wasn't. It was almost like I have to do this because I'm going to fail if I don't. But looking back, it was like, of course I needed to. I can't take all these chemistries at one time.
Right,
this is ridiculous. And I'm still recovering. This was too much and working. So how did I do it? By that point, I kind of transitioned to, unfortunately, I was still like, as many of us do, where I was switching. Like, okay, so I'm not going to undereat anymore. I'm just going to be super fit and eat a lot of food.
Right.
And be willing to have a lot of muscle. So that would end up turning into like deprivation-driven eating, binge eating, unfortunately, and over-exercise. And, literally out of some desperation of starting to see like what wasn't working. Like I'm a really good dieter and it wasn't working anymore. I'm a really good whatever, and I know a lot, and it's not working. It's not making me thinner. It's not making me happier. Combined with what I was learning, I was like, and I'm not like saying like, oh, I just had these great epiphanies and I learned, it was all just so natural and easy for me to see this. It wasn't. It was just out of years of, oh, like this doesn't jive. So here they're telling me to like eat this certain way in traditional healthy eating, but that's not going to work for me because there's too much fear around it. There's too much like good food, bad food around it, even if it's trying to be gently about health. And so I had to learn if I'm going to actually be healthy, I'm going to have to let it all go, all go, every bit of it. And so by the time I'm a senior in my undergrad, I'm like, I'm going to get this piece of paper and I'm going to get out of here. And I'm either going to learn how to teach what I've, this intuitive eating that I'm learning. And again, I didn't really have a name for it then. I had learned about intuitive eating through the book at some point, but it still wasn't quite that same language. And I still was in and out with my dietitian too. I'm going to have to learn how to do this or just be in another profession because it's not going to work. Right. It's not going to work. And I don't feel good even teaching it because I know that like if this is making me potentially feel crazy, the average person is going to either give their power away or blindly follow this stuff, or they're just going to rebel and say like, it doesn't work, so who cares? So
when you were doing your undergrad and finishing up and everything, I'm sure there were moments when did you have group projects or anything that you had to do? How was that? I mean, did you have to feel like you were completely, as my dad liked to say, playing the game, in order just to get by and make okay, I'm just going to go along with this?
So I had my classes where it's like this class unnerves me so much and disgusts me so much that a B is good enough. And this class, like I really care about, so I'll get an A. I know the teacher's nice, so I'm not going to totally rebel. I had to play all these games with myself to be able to get through it. And even in group projects, like, we're doing these things and I'm just doing what I need to do to get through it. And like where I could rebel a little bit and challenge, I did. And
did you get any pushback from the teachers when you did do that?
Well, there wasn't. Again, I didn't really have a lot of the like health at every size education, and all this research wasn't out in 2000. When I was finishing up, or 2001. They are on small levels. I just felt like that. I started observing people more. It's like I noticed that, like, oh, here's my dad, who's like this really little guy, eats whatever he wants, but he doesn't stress about it. He eats what he wants from hunger and fullness. And yeah, he eats lots of ice cream and he eats lots of this or that, and he doesn't have all these problems.
Right.
And here are my friends who are, I was lucky to actually have a good little group of friends. They were all shapes and sizes, bigger girls, taller girls, girls that were all different kinds of what we wouldn't consider like proportional. And they ate a variety of food, and I was with them a lot, and they ate from hunger and fullness. They didn't have any health problems that I knew of. And I'm like, you know what? Like, here are these people eating all different kinds of ways, and they're not all over the place with their weight. And so all the things I'm learning, again, there's just feels like there's a little bit of a disconnect. So I started like practicing in these little group projects, like, like feeling the difference between like lecturing them about like, oh, they drank some beer that weekend, they shouldn't drink so much beer, to like, I'm wondering what that feels like, and just not knowing what I'm doing at all. And just, like I said, I'm playing the game and kind of trying to like observe things as I'm going. So, I hope that was a long-winded question or answer, but that's kind of how it went, is like, how am I going to do this? And what do I need to do to like, and the same thing happened in my internship. All dietitians have to go through, it's close to a year at minimum, clinical internship, and learn about all different disease states and how you treat that with food and all that. And it was the same kind of thing of like, when people aren't feeling well, like we're taught to like, here's your meal plan, have a nice day. We're going to your room, and here's your paper. Don't eat so much fat or whatever. And they're miserable and they don't want to hear this. And it's definitely unempowering. It's kind of it's basically shaming, in my opinion. So again, I started practicing. Okay, so I'm supposed to teach that here's the things you do. And I would just sit and talk with people. And that's where I started to get this heart for like, this is the way it needs to be, of being with people. And if they happen to feel some readiness to like, here's some stuff, and I wonder what that would be like if we were to practice with or experiment with blah, blah, blah. And then let it go, versus I'm the expert, you know nothing, and there's a right way to do it, and it's my way.
Right. So you didn't get much, you didn't get much pushback, but it's like you stood by what you believe, but it wasn't like, I'm adamant about this. I'm going to like, I'm not, this is the way I believe. Like, I feel like you are a little bit more like, I'm going to be a little sly about this because I know, like, I totally understand that, coming from the fitness industry and having some similar experiences. And
I'll share with you, and in my internship, I was a personal trainer, and it's the same kind of thing. People come to me like, help me lose weight. And, so trainers, aren't supposed to be giving nutrition advice, but I could hear all my colleagues doing it. And I'm the one in internship, like, people are like, well, help me lose weight. I'm like, well, one, legally I can't do that and teach you how to like do that. And secondly, who says there's anything wrong with your weight? Like, let's just go and have some fun here and move your body and get stronger and build your stamina and feel good. And let's see what happens. And I was rebelling in that way too. That was a little more open because, so it was a little easier, but in a clinical setting, it's like, I kind of had to do what I felt like I needed to do without advertising it. But still feeling like I was doing no harm. That was always my intent. Like, how can I do the least harm right now in the framework I'm in, I
love it. That's great.
So, that's very early on in the education. And at the same time, I'm still learning. I'm still struggling with, like, my own body image and how to make peace with the body that I feel like, the food was way easier, the exercise was way harder, and the body image was way harder.
Right.
And so that just took me till at least 2003 to get to the place of, like, this may be where it's at. And maybe I can't change this. And, that's hard to be with that, but you also know that the more you try to control it, the more out of control the food gets. So you come to this place at some point of some acceptance, especially if you're doing therapy along with that, to recognize like, okay, I can separate out, what's going on with my food is really, really like a doorway into what's happening in my life, internally and externally. And I learned how to like, parse this stuff out to where I could see like, okay, here's the biological stuff. And here's me and all the facets of my past, present, and what I'm worried about in the future, and what's what and what needs what.
Right. Going back to the kind of like when you said you were working through your recovery in the early stages and whatnot, and doing your schooling. What was the thing for you? that was like the turning point in your recovery that really made you like, I got to get better because of this? Or what was your motivation? What was your thing that really pulled you forward?
You know what? I tend to be maybe I'm a really empathic person, but I tend to be a slow learner sometimes. So I would have to have some things really happen to like see big contrasts, you know? So, I think as that last year of school came around and I started like, it was at the end of some of that really traumatic relationship as well that I started to realize I don't deserve everything that's happening to me and what I'm allowing to happen. And that came about because I got more engaged with some classmates, and it was I think I was starting to feel some accomplishment in my life because I was almost finished this degree through all kinds of recovery, trials and tribulations. And that started to build a little sliver of confidence that wasn't there. Like, this is me doing this. It has nothing to do with my body.
I love it.
And then I started to see, oh my gosh, like these other people treat me really kindly and like me, and I don't really know why, and becoming friends. Oh, and this is not because of this body it's the highest I've ever weighed. Oh, so if they're treating me nicely, maybe this person is wrong, or maybe I'm not wrong and this person's wrong for what's happening. And that, like, I started having these little mini realizations that build some confidence. And then by the end of that last year, I broke up with this person and started to realize, like, I'd rather be alone than treated so poorly. And that built, like, having that resolve was really helpful. Like, oh, I'm worth just, I'm okay. Like, who I am inherently is okay. And so that means that that started to really help kind of break down some of that compulsive exercising, because I was using a lot of that to run away from how bad I felt. And so I think it was these hard times that really pushed me into recognizing some worth. And then, I got into a really healthy relationship, which ended up being my husband, 14 years later now. Yeah. And that was another thing of like, oh, this person's talking to me and I'm the heaviest I've ever been. Maybe I'm not a piece of what.
Right.
And that spurred me on to like, and he was very vocal about like what he saw in me, like my personality and those kind of things that separated out from the body, and started eating more intuitively and not getting up at 4 a.m. to work out anymore and not caring so much that I didn't. And slowly over time, this felt like a life that I wanted to be free for. And so I think it was just a combination of like, if more than anything else, like me putting myself out there in life and life exchanging with me. Like, oh, so I put myself out there to some people, even though it was hard, and they're friends. Oh, they're mirroring back that I'm okay.
Right. You took that.
Each of those little things. Yeah.
You took that risk in putting yourself out there, and you were accepted for who you were, regardless of your size. Sounds like.
It wasn't about weight. It wasn't about anything else, because we're all poor, college kids together. It's like I got nothing to offer except for, obviously, it must just be me. And there was a little glimmer of like, for a second, it's like you had that. I didn't have that much insight then, but there was a level of like, oh, maybe I'm okay enough for people to hang out with me, so I'll keep doing this. And
That's
then
great.
So those were the key points. And then I ended up, deciding it was more long-term future with this boyfriend, then fiance, then eventually husband. It's like, I don't want to drag this into the next phase. So I really got pretty serious about like, pushing through with the body image stuff of really like, who says this belly's too big? And really start doing that deeper body image work to where, I would say by 2003-ish, my last attempt at a diet was 2003. Before I got married, I had that glimmer of like, I'm gonna get married. I should get a like more flat abs. And I'm like, wait a minute, what in the heck am I doing? He's marrying me,
right?
So that lasted about a month. And I'm like, I'm done. No, I'm not going back, because I could see clearly insanity of what I was doing at the moment, even though it's very seductive.
It's very seductive
of the cultural, conditioning, of. This is your big day. You got to look your best. Like, wait a minute. Well, what is my best? Like, hasn't that already happened? This is just a day. This is just a formal day. It doesn't change the other days that have already happened.
Yeah. So, the whole wedding thing is such a huge, that's like a whole nother Oprah topic there.
It is. It's a whole other hour conversation of like why that happens and what we do about it. So,
right.
So go ahead. I was gonna say that's the meat, the juiciness, and a very obviously short thing around my recovery.
do you feel if you didn't have that kind of support, you were accepted just as you are, irregardless of what you looked like, your size, by, your peers, and whatnot? Do you feel like that it would have been more difficult to navigate your way through schooling to become a dietitian, or do you think that that wasn't a big influence for you?
Well, really, I made it through most of that undergrad education pretty much on my own. I was very isolated. So I think because, it's always like the hand that feeds. Like, the eating disorder is also like one of your greatest assets. So it's like when you have drive and your perfectionism and you're highly sensitive and people-pleasing and empathic, you tend to like kind of just honestly naturally have this creative juice and fire to like move forward with things. So that was happening, even though, I was lonely and miserable and still really in it, in the eating disorder. It just helped at the end to feel like there were other things besides the eating disorder and being accomplished at something.
Do you think you would have had the courage, I would say, to follow your heart in what you believed was the right thing for you, and as far as practicing being a dietitian, as opposed to playing the game, continuing to play the game and going along with everything?
You know what? That's a really interesting question. I wish we had a crystal ball. I think that I would have taken a longer road, because I'm thinking about, I was trying to sink into that question of that courage. What's coming up for me as you ask that question is I think that I eventually would have found my way to something different, even if it started off more traditional. But I think that helped me get there faster. Maybe by, who knows, I can't predict this, but it feels like it'd be by a couple years, 5 years, I would have played the game a little longer probably. Because I'm so connected to people and where I see suffering, I think I would have started to see how what I was doing isn't working, and I was a part of that, and it would have been hard to tolerate at some point. I probably would have been caught in it longer, I think, and especially more in the sports dietetics world. That's kind of where I was probably going to head, which would have just fed into more the compulsive. It would have been very much the compulsive part with the exercise that got me that direction, because, starving yourself isn't maintainable, and binging becomes, not maintainable, and they always switch roles. And, but it's pretty easy to hide in our culture behind being healthy, being a really healthy, chronic exerciser and looking like you're being healthy. And that would have been someplace I would have hidden longer for sure.
So after you got your degree and you did your internship, did you work at with a group of people? Did you immediately go off and start your own thing? What was your next steps?
I had to get a job. So I did the most palatable thing I could. And it ends up being in clinical dialysis, you work in it's kind of an outpatient setting, and it's not diet related at all. These people are just about surviving, and they have a very specific way they have to eat, and you just kind of follow labs. And it was very,
but it wasn't the eating sort of recovery world.
No, it wasn't. But I just needed to get a job, and so I did that, knowing that this is my temporary home. This is where. And the next step was I found a mentor within a year that has been in this field 30 plus years, and is really pretty well respected. And she ended up taking me on as an associate in her practice, and I did 3 years of it was pretty much a master's degree of probably 6 hours a week of supervision and learning, and just I knew how to be with people, and I knew how people what it feels like. I've been in those shoes, so I could pretty nothing people could tell me could shock me that I would hear. It was more about learning the framework of how to deliver and how to be with people's strong emotion. And
did she practice health at every size, intuitive eating?
Yeah, she was a health at every size, intuitive eating. She's written books about all this stuff, and been in the bigger treatment facilities. And so I worked with her for 9 years, and continued to hone my skills and have a full practice, and now work online and have my own practice. And eventually I kind of morphed into more somatic stuff, was that I think is what is a missing piece for a lot of us, of learning how so we can learn how to first eat enough and settle down the behaviors and understand what the behaviors are for, and learn to make peace with food and let go of the scale and be okay with our bodies. But then what I find that sometimes draws people back in is knowing how to like know what it is physically from not so much the mental cognitive, like what are you feeling, what's the story is, what are you feeling, and how to know how to build safety in your own body and resource yourself and decouple shame from like other emotions and your food. And so that's kind of been where my area of study has been the last 3 or 4 years is just this really deep somatic teaching people how to, like trust in, feelings and intuition and know like you are your own expert.
Right.
For sure. So
since you started your own practice and your own, your own thing, do you feel like, I don't know, do you attend other, workshops, seminars and whatnot with dietitians that don't practice that? Or do you have any interactions with dietitians that aren't familiar with health at every size or intuitive eating? And if so, have you gotten pushback from that community, from the community of, dietitians that maybe see people for weight loss and all of that stuff? Have you had experiences with those, with that type of thing?
Sure. I mean, it doesn't come up a lot because when you're like, firmly in this paradigm, you tend to just, you might do talks or you might talk with other physicians or therapists. And basically when that happens, they might listen or whatever. And those relationships honestly just kind of drift away. And the people that are like, that feel some kind of pull towards that alignment, they kind of end up showing up or they end up sticking with you as colleagues. And that's kind of how it goes, just very naturally, because there's such different paradigms. I mean, they don't really fit very well because one is over here saying like, you have to do this to be healthy, or it's just better for all kinds of reasons that people might give. And, I'm over here saying, but I think that I believe your body is the wisdom keeper of all this. Like, what is your right weight? What is like what food you need to eat to like feel more vital? Or if you're having some kind of like imbalance going on, like, yeah, there are some like treatment protocols, let's say, but it always has to be almost layered on like on you versus you being like fitting into it. I don't know. When you say pushback, I don't really have that too much anymore because there's just not a lot of interaction when you're just so open about what you do. A lot of my people, whether they're quote unquote eating disorder patients or just people who come like, I'm sick of dieting. It's not worked. And really the challenge for me is always helping find other services for people that will support what the patient's goals are, which is I don't want to hear about weight loss if I get a sore throat. That's the challenging part. And, whenever I've lived in different places all over in Florida and, when if I have a small handful of physicians, that's just where I send all my people because it's like, I want them to have good experiences with healthcare versus like I went and I was totally traumatized.
Right.
And so that's where my challenge always lies is educating in, the physicians kind of either little bits or some are very receptive and you just never know what you're going to get. And sometimes, you'll have a patient or a client who has a doctor and it's more about if it's not feeling good, we got to find somebody else. I know you've seen this person for 20 years, but your goals are different now and you're different and they're not the right fit for you anymore.
Right. So you've been doing this for 11 years. Are there moments in your career as far as helping people work through their recovery and eating disorder? Are there moments where you feel you're just exhausted from being in the field and you say, I wish I would have done something else because I feel like this is so far behind me and I feel like I just keep having to go back to it. Do you have those moments? I don't have like, what am I still doing this for? It's probably because I feel like because I feel so healed. It's almost like, that happened to me. I have those memories, but when I'm at a session, I'm not thinking about how many calories I'm eating. I'm not thinking about like my body size. I'm in the business of my life or learning or in my somatic classes or I'm in picking up dog poop or whatever I'm doing. It's like, it's interesting. I find that, I'm thinking about the challenging part in this world is keeping balance I love what I do. And it's really easy to want to see like here's something this thing that they might need or this thing that I could be helpful with. And I have to learn to keep good boundaries emotionally and keep good self-care. And boundaries are just like, I think that's a thing that I came in onto this planet with of learning. That's one of my life things of like learning how to keep honing that and self-care as well. So yeah, those were my only challenges really is like learning to keep myself filled up and not feeling bad about that or feeling like that
I could do that one last thing because that would be whatever that could be helpful. It's like, no, I don't need to do everything, or no, that's not mine to do. Or, for me, it's always in that kind of conversation, because I could spend 10 hours a day doing things that I think would be, or creating things I think that would be helpful to people. But that might not be mine to do, and it's certainly not my body's to be able to keep up with,
Right.
So I think that's my challenge.
With the emergence of social media being such a huge part in eating disorder recovery, there's so many people that, especially on Instagram, there's a lot of people that are going through the recovery, and they post pictures of every single meal they eat, all the food things and all that. How do you feel about that? Do you think that's helpful? Do you think it's harmful? How do you feel about all that?
I certainly don't think that. I think from a recovery standpoint of connection and not feeling so alone, and if people really come to it in a place of good boundaries about how much, knowing like what you should share and what you shouldn't share. Like, there's a level of like, if you really tune in, like, it's not really imperative that people know about my every single meal, because eating disorders are part of what feeds them is this competing comparison, because that's part of the hole in somebody's, emotions or their soul is, I'm not good enough. So, the eating disorder does not want somebody to outdo them,
right,
or undereat them, or overexercise them, or out-ab them, or whatever.
It's a tricky question.
It's a really tricky question, because I see the value in like support groups online. I do. If the container is very safe and well maintained, I think it's super positive. I grew up in an area of 1,000 people. There was nobody that I knew or that was open about that had an eating disorder or ever had one. So I was alone. And it would have been nice to like hear people say, I'm really having a rough day today, and I'm not going to talk about my numbers here, but I'm just really feeling like this is, maybe this is too hard, and just have somebody going, you got this, you're okay, keep going. That would have been beautiful. But I think beyond that, it's where it becomes like you're asking for strangers to give you something that they probably can't give you. Right. Like some kind of affirmation. Yes, your body looks good enough. No, you're not too big. No, your food's fine. Nobody can know that.
So it's still that relying on that external validation.
Yeah. Support and compassion and just holding space for somebody is imperative. And that's great. But the details of like what's the right way for you to be doing it, that's really up to you and probably your helping professional. It's not somebody that it's probably still really in it unless they're saying, girl, I don't want to see your food. You need to focus on your meal plan or whatever it is you're doing. You don't need me to validate that's too much or too little food. And I'm not going to do that for you. Right. If that was the case, that would be, good, but that's hard. That's pretty tough to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Since you've been in recovery, besides, finding your way and becoming a dietitian, what has been the suckiest part of your recovery so far that you didn't expect at all to deal with? I mean, we talked about the wedding thing. And I don't I think we somewhat might think that might suck, but I think you don't understand how much it sucks until you get into it.
Yeah, that's like minor. That's like small potatoes.
Right.
That moment. I think the suckiest part was after I got into a place where, I had to gain weight, and I wasn't totally opposed to that because I knew where I wasn't healthy. I wanted to feel better physically in my body. I was an athlete, so I wanted to feel capable again, and because all of that got taken away. But it was when I got to a place of feeling pretty good, but my body wanted to keep going because when I started my eating disorder, I was still later stages of puberty, and I needed to grow beyond where I started. So I still had to get taller, and actually, when I was 20 years old, I grew 2 inches because I had stunted my growth in high school. Wow. So I grew 2 inches. I had to gain that plus pounds to account for that, plus just becoming more female because I was still kind of a kid. So some people call that overshooting. I call it I just had to grow up and get like my adult body. I never had that before. So accepting that I didn't have control over that was really, really hard. And I had many moments of like restricting and binging and laying on the bathroom floor and like tears and rage of like, there's no more I can do. I can't restrict. I can't go over exercise. I already did that. I just binged. There's nothing I can do. It's midnight. And having nights that like recognizing there's no way out of this. But
But through it.
There's nothing I can do. I have to feel these feelings, and it felt like I was going to die. And once I started recognizing, like this sucks, and I'm going to have to feel this stuff, it became a little more palatable, even though it still sucked every time that happened, where I had to like eat a full meal and not do anything about it and really feel like, ooh, I feel flesh and I feel body, and this feels like not me, but it is me, and I don't like it because of all the body image constructs I had to work through. And, letting go of all those identities that like, thinner and leaner is like stronger, more powerful, and less emotional, and I'm less weak, and all that stuff that it was connected to. That was the suckiest part.
So did you develop some type of great coping skills, or did you, well, for me, therapy and so the nutrition therapy, and they both like were overlapping a little bit, and that's the way I do things too, of level, like seeing like, well, what does it mean to weigh more? Like, what does that mean about you? And understand, and just really seeing the stories I had about body and what that meant culturally, what that meant ancestrally in terms of my own family and lineage, and being a woman, and like what roles that played. That was all really important stuff for me to understand how I was using the pursuit of thinness, like what that function was. And once things make sense, I'm like, oh, I'm willing to tolerate the emotion now, because I understand like this had a purpose. So I'm not so crazy and so vain. This is really just about like, oh, I'm using body as like demonstration of power, or I'm using body as like rejection of, being controlled, or whatever it was, So there were lots of layers that I had to start seeing. But once I had to feel the feelings first. I couldn't mentally know that until I felt the feelings. You can't get out of that. So the beginning of that process was the suckiest part of like, oh, I'm feeling feelings I haven't felt for probably my whole life, since I was 5, if I was lucky. And it's okay. There's nothing wrong. I love that.
There's nothing wrong. There's just, this is my stuff. I've got to feel it.
I love that. That's fantastic. So what makes recovery worth all the sucky parts? I mean, today, like in this day, and like right now in the present day, what keeps you going in your recovery? What keeps you motivated to stay the course, keep moving forward?
I feel like I make this sound magical when I talk about it, or too easy, but it's like, I feel like I'm fully recovered. I'm not worried about my body. I like eat what I need to eat. And sometimes like I eat lots of quote unquote not highly nutrient dense food, and I might even feel crap about that, but I don't feel guilty about it, because I trust that like my body can run the show if I listen. And I'm like cool with like, why, like that is interesting. Like I don't feel quite as like good as usual, and I know it's because of how I'm eating. I don't feel bad about that. I'm just curious, like, what's that about? I'm like, oh yeah, I'm just bored with my eating, so I don't seem to like put as much effort. Well, how come? Oh, I'm actually kind of bored. Bored with what? Well, my food, but really my life. So I need to like, look at all of that. And so that feels like this awesome gift. Like that doorway through food is always now a tool we have to like, it's not what's going on with your food is always happening with your life.
Right.
So I don't have any like worries about like, oh my God, what's wrong with my body? Even if I've had health challenges since I've had a baby, I had health challenges afterwards that where my body wasn't easy peasy to like walk around in sometimes, like pain or GI things or some exhaustion things I've had to like make food changes to address. And that's not always easy to do because we grieve things, or I've had to be more like my body's more sensitive now. So it's like, okay, so what do I need? And if I do this, this is the result. And if I don't, that's the result. It doesn't feel restrictive. It just feels choiceful what I'm going to do or not. So that's a huge gift.
Right.
I love feeling like the culture can do whatever it wants or try to scream at me for however it wants to get me to do something. And it's like, I would rather be an outsider than to go through the hell of all that.
Right.
And that feels like you can't replace that.
That's that true sense of empowerment. Like you're so at peace with who you are in the body you have, that you know that when you are authentic and true to yourself, doesn't matter what's going on, doesn't matter what the outside world thinks or what it's doing.
Right.
You're true to yourself, and you can look at yourself in the mirror and be proud of who you are.
Absolutely. And be cool. It's like, I'm not perfect. I'm still working through all,
right.
I'm not everybody continues like, path work or whatever, being, introspective about themselves, but, I love it. And I'm learning how to like not take it so seriously anymore, and enjoy life more, like actually be more joyful. That was a learning edge for me that I'm still learning, that like, yeah, there's some places where I can get really, really wound up and take things too personally and see it and feel the ick of it, and then look back like 5 minutes later and say, oh, so it's okay. It's okay that's just like one of your patterns. It's okay.
Right.
And not have, like I would in the past, like that old self-hatred, like, what's wrong with you? Can't you get it together? Aren't you, like, you should know better. It's like, oh yeah, I'm so flawed human. Wow. And then I have a daughter. So it's like, I feel up to the challenge of, like, even if I don't do anything perfectly and she ends up in therapy, it's like, you know, it wasn't because I wasn't really trying hard and I wasn't like looking at my stuff, you know, not that she would. I'm just making a joke out of that. But it's like, I feel like with everything I learned, I get to help another possible generation come into it just a little bit more like in themselves. And that feels really good. To know that, like, if somebody says stuff about body or food, I'm like, no, I want you're the boss, number one. and just being a better, you know, a helper to her or a navigator for her, you know, and that feels really good, you know, and that's why recovery is worth it. To, like, even if you don't have children, like, you being whatever beacon it is that's yours to do, you know, in the world is worth the effort.
Right. So if someone else is interested in going into becoming a dietitian, you know, as maybe they're in recovery or working through the recovery, what advice would you give them, or what words of wisdom would you give that person?
Yeah. Well, you know that you're probably going to have some people that are going to say, oh, you shouldn't go there because, you know, that's your stuff. And, you know, you don't really want to be a dietitian anyway because because of your food stuff. You don't need to listen to that. It's still, if this feels really, really strongly in your heart, this is what I've got to do, follow that and keep doing your work. I mean, there's more to do, no matter how much you feel like you got it, you know, there's not a finish line, but there's a, you know, place where the more cleaned up your relationship with food and body is, the more you can say, like, I can be with this body even if it's bigger, and I'm willing to navigate that in this fat phobic world. Your clients will trust you, and they'll know. They will always know, like, because it will slip out accidentally, just because they're always watching, they're always reading you. So, the more clear you are about, like, how you're doing and how your ease or lack of ease is coming across. And that just takes practice and learning and supervision. I would say seek out people who've been doing this. That's the next thing I would say. Like, you know, get your licensure, get that stuff done, and then support yourself however you have to, whether it's a place you work that provides this kind of supervision or a different kind of job, and then you seek it out and you exchange in whatever way you need to like get that training to do that. Don't feel like, oh, it's too expensive or those really help me. It will make a huge difference in your trajectory of, like, one, just your comfort level of doing this work, because it's not for it's for the big-hearted people. Big-hearted people who you can hold a lot, and if that's you, then you'll be fine. But yeah, get yourself the training and supervision you need to feel comfortable, because I go into this thinking, okay, this, I understand all this, and then you get into sessions, and you're like, oh my gosh, what do I say?
Right. Do you feel like there's a lot more resources out now for people than there were before? Yeah,
there's a lot more people like me who provide trainings. Like, I was just really lucky that I landed in the place I did at the time I did. The person who I wanted to work with happened to be where I moved, and I didn't really know that at the time, so I was lucky. But right now, I know lots of dietitians online who are very, very good, who have, I provide supervision. There's other people who do too. And I've worked with more than one person. I work with a couple, so yeah, dip your toe in lots of waters and learn from lots of people. And everybody does things their own style. And there's no best person. There's just really, really good practitioners out there. Not lots, but we try to make ourselves visible so you can find us, so you can because building confidence is just so helpful to be able to feel like, okay, I've got the experience and my recovery is good, and now here's the framework for how to teach this, or here's like some steps for me to like help open those doors for them, So yeah. Now that, do you mentor people that are going through? I do.
That's awesome.
And that's one of my favorite. Oh my gosh, as much as I love, I don't think there's a best favorite, but like as much as I love client sessions, I love supervision. I love, bringing out, here's another person in the world who gets to teach this. So it's not just like me and 4 dozen other or 10 dozen other really good practitioners in the country. There's now one more, and then one more, and one more, and and we're all so different. I could have the same skill set and personality is almost identical to somebody else that's just as loving and compassionate, but somebody resonates with me more than somebody else, and vice versa. And that's just because we're all like these unique thumbprints, Right. So if there's more of us, that means there's more people to match with, and just so beautiful.
There's plenty of space for everyone at the table.
There's plenty. And so, getting trainings in visual confidence, which will make you feel like it's safe to be more visible. That's why that's so important. So now that now the listeners know that you do mentor people, and I'm sure there's people out there that are listening that are interested, that might be, considering getting their licensure and going forward with their dream of working in the recovery field and being a dietitian in that world. How do they get in touch with you and and all of that stuff? What's your contact info? Sure. Well, my website is www.tracybrownrd.com, and I'm on all the social media sites, putting out stuff most days. That's the easiest way to find me. I've got a newsletter that people can subscribe to and just, on either end of the spectrum, learn about. Like I treat, not just restrictive eating disorders and diet stuff, but binge eating and all that as well. And I will say that I do also mentor. I don't have any dietitians right now, interestingly enough, but that I'm working with as a mentee role or a mentor role. But I actually have a couple of health coaches, because a lot of people in that role have like, I went through the Institute of Integrative Nutrition, and it made me feel a little bit restrictive, and so I can't imagine other people, and I want to break through from that, and I want to actually teach more intuitive eating. And so they come to me just for skill building of how do I teach this in like a not harming kind of way. Like I love some of this nutrition information, and I want to keep sharing it, but in a way that doesn't, because they have people come in with honestly disordered eating characteristics as well. And I don't know what to do with this, because I can't just say, do the thing, because they're already restrictive.
Right.
So it's So we need to switch gears here, give them a way, because they're already doing probably more than they need to do. So we need to help them with some different set of skill set. I have a couple of health coaches right now that I'm working with just to help them know what they're, identify what they're seeing. And then secondly, just, know what their comfort level is with navigating all that, and then how much they can do with people. And helping these people who think they need to fix their nutrition. No, they just actually need to have more peace.
Right.
And if they're more relaxed with their food, they'll probably just feel better.
Right.
Because they're already doing all the things that they, quote unquote, should do.
So who inspires you in the, I would say, recovery world? Like, who's your inspiration?
Oh my gosh. I mean,
please name names. We like to know who.
Oh my God. This is really hard. I love, Reagan Chastain, which she's on. She does. I have a lot. I'll just think of the names that are in my group. I have a 6-month kind of group concept around intuitive eating and dealing with your, I call it your sacred sensitivity and your body image stuff and all that. So I'm thinking about all the people in my group that have they've come in to do interviews for my people to hear. So Reagan Chastain and Carmen Cool and Anna Guest Jelly, and all these people are more like health at every size, activists and workers, and other dietitians like Fiona Sutherland, and she's in Australia, and there's so many good dietitians here. There's Christy Harrison, and these are just all my colleagues that I just love so much, and I know them basically briefly, through just online conversations. Oh gosh, there's so many that I'm leaving out. My old mentor, Karen Cortina, my current, somatic mentors, Sway Spilkin. They're not necessarily in recovery world, but they're definitely just in this body trust world. Right. I look at the trauma world that I love and learning about somatic experiencing and Hakomi, and Raphael Kushner was he was a past mentor of mine, and he talks in my class. Of course, the authors of Intuitive Eating. Oh my gosh, some of the older generation that I learned from, like some of my old mentor Karen Cortina, but like the women who wrote When Women Stop Hating Their Bodies, Hirschman Munter. My favorite book ever, Eating the Lie of the Moon from Anita Johnson.
Right.
Carolyn Costin. I'm just failing to mention dozens, I know, but there's a lot of good people out there, and I think that people will say, well, where are all the people that help them? They're all out there.
Right.
We need you to just do different Google searches, like health at every size, embodiment, intuitive eating, non-diet dietitians. Like Google things that are different from like, and you could do like, how do I stop binging? Those are good Google searches too, and will pop up probably. But instead of the tricks of like, how do I control my body? It's like, how do I make peace with myself? How do I come home to my body? It's all there. It's there waiting for you.
That's fantastic. So thank you so much for all of your incredible insight. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. And you inspire me because I can tell you being in the world of recovery, and not being the traditional fitness instructor, it's very difficult. It's scary, I would imagine there's parts of that being in the world of the dietitian world, where there are still so many dietitians that their goal is, that weight loss is the epitome of all accomplishments, and so it's the being true to yourself, I think. Is so important when making the decision to be in the recovery world. And you have done it amazingly and with so much strength and so much courage. And it's so inspiring to hear other professionals that have gone through their own demons and worked through their own battles and struggles and have come out the other side. And they're doing it. They're doing the work. They're helping other people. They're a service to other people. And it's an absolutely beautiful thing to see that. And it's like you come full circle. And it's so inspiring. And I think it inspires so many people that are like on the verge of just starting their recovery of like, well, what do I do now? Like, where do I go from here? And there's always that option to be of service. There's always that option to help other people. And it's that sense of that it fills you up and it gives you this sense of such a greater purpose in life. And that's that for me, I think that's the recovery proof. Yeah. That keeps you strong in your recovery because you know that you're being of service to other people.
Right.
And it's just, I love when I hear stories of that. And I love how it's impacting the world and how it's impacting the world of women, of men. And it's just changing our conversation about food and changing our conversation about body. And it's been this like slow evolution the past like couple of decades. And it's just getting more and more like revved up. It's like a snowball. It's starting to build so much more. And it's people like you, people like all the people that you mentioned, are playing such a huge role in that. And I just want to thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for all your contributions, all your work, because you are contributing to that snowball. And it's just a beautiful thing. And it keeps seeing other people that are in the world of recovery that have been through it themselves, keeps me going. And it keeps me feeling like, no, I do have something to give. I do have something to share. And I know that other people that are entering a professional world of like eating disorder recovery that have been through their own demons, I know that inspires them as well. So with that, I just want to thank you so much for sharing your story, because I know it's going to be so helpful for all of our listeners. And I'm so excited that all the work you're doing, it's just wonderful.
Can I say two more things, if you don't mind?
Absolutely.
I want to say I honor, hands to heart to you for being in the fitness industry and just you showing up the way you do and offering people another outlet, because, I did that route many, many years ago. And it was so hard to be in an environment where everybody was like, lose weight, do more, eat less. And to be around that, I have a luxury of I got to kind of create this little space, and it's just me and a client or my group. And there's not a lot of I got a bubble going, but you work in a place where there's no, you can create your own bubble with it and around you, but you hear that. I'm sure you do. And so I honor you for I'm showing up here, and that's that's a really, really big deal to be in that environment. So I remember what that felt like, and I was like, I got to get out of here. So I wasn't ready. Maybe now I could do it now, but back then, like, 10 plus years ago, like, oh, this is too much. I can't hear this. Yeah, I wasn't ready. So that's a testament, to you too, of like your strength and you just being on purpose, which is beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
And I want to say to people who are listening that are considering, I want to make sure you know that your recovery is in service of the world anyway, no matter if you become a therapist, a dietitian, a fitness person, physician, whatever, if it's directly with people with food and body, that's wonderful. And if you feel that you want to do that, and if you ever change your mind, that's okay too. I see that a lot. And I actually counsel people like, they actually went the whole way through. They did lots of training with eating disorders. They got their RRD, they got licensed, and then they get in 5 years and like, you know what? I think I've outgrown this. I don't want to do this anymore. Right. And that's not a failure. And I'm like, blessings, like go on and then do the next iteration of yourself, because holding yourself here is no longer, it's not your thing anymore. And that's okay. There's no shame about that. I have a person that's going to go on to, she's going back to school for a long time to like shift gears to like something that feels a better match. And we've worked through that. Like you're not failing. I think this is a wonderful, you're being, again, more true to yourself now, and you need to do that. You needed to do that for the time you needed to. And now you're willing and ready for something else, and that's good too. So either way is good. It's just getting really clear about like how you want to serve and how you take care of yourself, and that it's just such, either way is beautiful. And I think sometimes I hear people feel pressure that they have to do it because they've come so far. I'm like, you don't have to do anything. Right. So absolutely. Yeah. So anyway, I just want to make sure I put that out there. But anyway, thank you, Robin, for having me. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to chat. I'm so glad it finally worked out.
Yeah, absolutely. No. Absolutely.
And and we will be in touch. And again, thank you so much.
All right, great. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Thank you so much for joining us for this week's episode of Recovery Sucks, but It's So Worth It. And remember, this podcast is by no means a replacement for proper medical care or attention. If you feel you are struggling in your eating disorder recovery, please seek out the proper medical care. And if this episode was helpful for you in any way, I encourage you to share it with others that you think might be struggling in their eating disorder recovery. We'll see you next time.